Rachel West woke up a little before her alarm, ready to get the kids ready and get to work at the clinic. In the dim light of her bedroom, she felt for her phone. 5:45 am in bed next to her. Mark, her husband, was snoring quietly. Rachel carefully climbed out of the warm blanket, trying not to wake him, and tiptoed into the bathroom. 20 minutes later, she was standing in the kitchen, dressed in a light blue scrub suit. Her hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, her face lightly made up an everyday work look. A kettle was boiling on the stove. Rachel dropped 2 packets of oatmeal into a bowl, poured boiling water over them, and began cutting up fruit for the children. Her movements were honed by years of morning routine, making breakfast, waking and dressing the little ones, packing their lunchboxes. While the porridge was steeping, she peered into the nursery. The small, bright room contained 2 beds. Their 8-year-old daughter Sarah was curled up in one, and their 3-year-old son Luke was snoring in a crib with sides in the other. Rachel called softly, "Sarah, honey, it's time to get up." The girl stirred, stretched, and opened her eyes. "Uh-huh. Is it morning already?" "Yes, it's almost 6:20, Mom smiled. "Let's wash up and have breakfast. Today is talent show day at school, remember." These words affected Sarah better than any alarm clock. She sat up abruptly, remembering today it was her turn to perform in front of the class with a song. Sarah was a little nervous, but also happy about this event. The girl jumped out of bed and hurried to the bathroom. Rachel, meanwhile, leaned over her son's crib and gently stroked his back. "Luke, wake up, my dear." The boy stirred, then sat up, rubbing his eyes with his fists. Seeing his mother, he smiled sleepily. "Mom, I don't want kindergarten." "I know, baby," she answered quietly, picking up her son. "But Mommy has to go to work, and you'll play with your friends in kindergarten. They're going to do some plastic surgery there today, I think. You like it, right?" Luke, his head on her shoulder, mumbled something unintelligible, not fully awake. Rachel kissed his soft blonde hair and carried him into the kitchen. The light was already on in the dining room. Mark came downstairs at this time, attracted by the smell of coffee. He stood by the coffee maker in pajama pants and a t-shirt, yawning and stretching. Hearing his wife's steps, he turned around. "Good morning," he muttered hoarsely, still waking up. "Hey," Rachel replied, setting Luke down in his high chair. "Is the coffee ready?" "Almost." He took out 2 mugs. "Do you want the usual one with milk?" She nodded, the corners of her lips twitching into a smile. This morning ritual, her husband making coffee while she got the kids ready, had been building up for years. Sometimes they barely spoke, both still sleepy, but the quiet togetherness itself was important. Rachel placed a bowl of baby oatmeal in front of her son and checked on Sarah. She appeared dressed in her school uniform, a blue skirt and white blouse, with her hair tousled from sleep. Rachel helped her braid her hair into a neat braid. "Mom, are you coming to the performance today?" Sarah asked, sitting down at the table opposite her brother. "I'm afraid I can't, dear," Rachel replied regretfully. "I have appointments until 5 o'clock, but Dad will try to come. Right, Mark?" The husband, who was laying out spoons for everyone on the table, looked up. "Of course, I'll try to get out of work early," he confirmed, smiling slightly at his daughter. "I won't miss your debut." Sarah nodded contentedly and began to eat her porridge. For a while, the kitchen was filled with the usual morning bustle. The children ate, exchanging short phrases. Mark drank coffee, checking the news on his phone. Rachel cut an apple into pieces for the children's lunchboxes, checked Sarah's backpack to make sure all the textbooks were in place, if there were enough pencils. Sometimes such weekdays seemed to her like an endless repetition of the same actions. But on the other hand, it was this routine that created a feeling of home and stability. When the microwave clock read 7:15, it was time to go. Rachel and Mark quickly got ready. He threw on a shirt and jeans. She helped Luke put on his tiny sneakers. Coat, backpack, lunchbox, nothing was forgotten. "Are you driving Sarah to school?" Rachel asked, looking up at her husband. "Yes, and you take Luke to kindergarten," Mark replied. This was also part of their usual division of labor. The school and kindergarten were in different directions, so each parent took on one child. Mark leaned over and quickly kissed his wife on the cheek. "See you in the evening." The fleeting kiss was as familiar as morning coffee. Rachel smiled and pushed her slightly sleepy son towards the exit. "Bye, Dad," Luke muttered, still waking up as he walked. "Bye, bye." Mark ruffled his son's soft curls and opened the door. It was a cool September morning in Cleveland. The sky was just beginning to lighten, and dew glistened on the lawns. Rachel placed Luke in the car seat of her SUV and climbed behind the wheel. Mark was already waving from his car as he headed off in the opposite direction, toward Sarah's elementary school. On the way to preschool, Rachel listened to her son babble from the back seat. He was wide awake and chattering away about how they had built a tower of blocks yesterday and how he was going to take his favorite stuffed dinosaur to preschool today. Rachel chimed in with short, succinct sentences, but her mind was already half focused on the day ahead. Working as a physician assistant at a clinic meant dozens of patients with all sorts of problems. Rachel loved her job. Helping people, explaining diagnoses, prescribing treatments, all of it made her feel useful. But sometimes she got tired of the constant stream of people and their complaints. Today, however, was supposed to be a little easier, since some of her patients had been rescheduled for another day because of her upcoming business trip. Yes, in 2 days Rachel was supposed to fly to Chicago for a medical conference. Once a year, the clinic sends several employees to a large event to improve their qualifications. This year, she and another doctor from the internal medicine department were chosen. The conference promised to be interesting. 3 days of lectures and seminars on new methods of treating chronic diseases. Rachel had not left the city alone for a long time after Luke was born. There was almost no time for business trips. Now everything was working out. Mark agreed to stay with the children for these 3 days. He was released from work early so that he could pick up his son from kindergarten. Grandma also promised to help if necessary. Thinking about it, Rachel had mixed feelings. On the one hand, joy at the opportunity to change the scenery and take a break from everyday life. On the other, anxiety and guilt at leaving her family. Mark assured her that he could cope. He was a good father in general and tried to support her professional aspirations. She remembered how she doubted whether to go to work when Luke was born. She wanted to stay home with the baby for a couple of years. But Mark then insisted that her career was also important, and they would be able to organize everything. In the end, when their son was 8 months old, they found a private kindergarten for him, and Rachel returned to work part-time, gradually going full-time. Now everything has settled down. Luke is used to the kindergarten, Sarah is in school, and after school classes until the evening. She and Mark had to carefully plan their schedules, but they managed. The car pulled up to the neat one-story building of the children's center. Rachel parked in her usual spot. She helped Luke out of the car, took his backpack with a change of clothes, and led her son to the entrance. They were met in the group by the teacher, a smiling middle-aged woman. "Good morning, Luke. How are you?" Luke pressed himself against his mother's leg, but still managed to squeeze out, "Good morning." "He's a little sleepy today," Rachel explained with a smile, "but I think he'll be back to normal soon. Of course, we're just about to build a city out of cubes. It will connect when it's ready." The teacher nodded. "Don't worry." Rachel sat down to say goodbye to her son. "I'll be back after lunch, okay? Be a good girl." She hugged the boy. He gave her a quick kiss on the cheek, already distracted by the familiar voices of the children from the playroom. "Bye, Mom," Luke muttered, hurrying over to the boys. Exhaling, Rachel straightened her shoulders and walked back out into the parking lot. It was about a 10-minute drive to the clinic. By 8 o'clock, she had already run into the reception area, carrying a laptop in one hand and a thermos with cooling coffee in the other. The workday was beginning. By midday, after 6 appointments in a row, Rachel felt pleasantly tired. Everything was going as usual. Patients with hypertension, those complaining of back pain, routine checkups for children. As a physician assistant, she could see simple cases and write prescriptions on her own, consulting with the doctor when necessary. There was a gap in the schedule around lunchtime, and Rachel finally sat down at the table to catch her breath and finish her granola bar. There was a short knock in the office, and a colleague, Dr. Laura Hill, a therapist with whom Rachel often worked in tandem, looked through the half-open door. "Hello, how are you today?" Laura asked, walking inside with a folder of patient histories. "Quite fine," Rachel said, taking a sip of water. "And you?" "That's okay, too. Listen, we were just talking about lunch. Want to join us? A couple of nurses and I are going to have coffee in the cafeteria." Rachel thought about it. Usually, during her lunch break, she would call home or stop by the local store for groceries. But today, no one was home. Mark was at work. The kids were busy. She could afford to relax. "Go ahead, why not?" she smiled. "Great, but first I'll quickly run to the reception. I need to clarify about the patient for tomorrow," Laura said, heading for the door. "I'll meet you in 5 minutes at the elevator." Fine. Left alone, Rachel checked her phone. There were a couple of messages, one from Mark, saying he'd dropped Sarah off at school on time and that she was in high spirits for her performance. The other was from Rachel's mom, simply checking in and reminding her that the family was planning a barbecue over the weekend. Rachel quickly texted her husband back, "Great, thanks, love you," and decided to call her mother back that evening since she didn't have time. She stood up, stretching her stiff back. She was eager to discuss the upcoming trip with Laura. Dr. Hill was also flying to Chicago, representing the clinic. Laura was used to such conferences, but for Rachel, this was her first serious business trip in several years. In the evening, when all the housework was done and the children were put to bed, Rachel finally sat on the edge of the bed, feeling relieved and tired. In the next room, Sarah and Luke were peacefully snoring. Mark, as usual, lingered at the laptop. He liked to watch movies in the evening or work when there was silence. Today, he was doing some calculations. Mark was an engineer by education, worked in a construction company, and sometimes brought drawings to finish at home. Rachel ran her hand over the bedspread, wondering if she had packed everything for the conference. Her suitcase was half packed against the wall, a business suit for the show, a couple of blouses, comfortable shoes. Tomorrow was Friday, a work day, and she was leaving early Saturday morning. The kids would stay with their dad. She went over the instructions she had left for Mark. Sarah had a swimming class on Saturday, so don't forget to drop her off. Luke had a classmate's birthday party at the daycare on Sunday. She had prepared enough food for 2 days ahead and put it in the refrigerator. She thought she had thought of everything. "What are you thinking about?" Mark's voice came from behind him. She turned around. Her husband was standing in the doorway, stretching after sitting at the computer. "Oh, I'm scrolling through to make sure I didn't miss anything before leaving," Rachel admitted. "I'm a little worried." Mark came over and sat down next to her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Everything will be fine. It's not the first time I've been left alone with the children, and Grandma promised to come help if anything happens." "I know," she laid her head on his shoulder. "Thank you. It's just that I haven't been away alone for a long time. What if something happens here?" "Nothing will happen here," Mark interrupted her confidently. "But you should be careful there. It's a big city, unfamiliar people. Stay in a group with your colleagues, okay?" Rachel chuckled. "It's like I'm a schoolgirl on a field trip." "I'm just worried." He kissed her temple softly. "I'll miss you." The words sounded sincere. Rachel glanced at her husband. In the dim light of the nightlight, his face looked tired but familiar. She suddenly felt ashamed of her secret excitement. Part of her was really happy about the trip, the opportunity to escape from the mundane. And now her husband says he will miss him. She will miss him too, probably. They have been together for so many years, 2 beautiful children, a comfortable life. Isn't that enough for her? No, just tired. "I'll miss you too," she answered quietly and touched his cheek with her lips. A few minutes later, Mark went to wash up, and Rachel lay down, trying to relax. In a day, she would leave for 3 days to another city. She needed to rest, to gain strength. She had no idea how much this trip would change her measured life. Early Saturday morning, Rachel was already on the plane from Cleveland to Chicago, feeling both excited and slightly anxious. For the first time in years, she had broken away from the usual circle of home and work. The three-day conference in Chicago seemed like a short vacation with a strict lecture schedule. Seeing her off at the airport, Mark smiled and joked that she would probably get a break from her family there. Rachel waved him off, but deep down she hoped for at least a little change of scenery. Chicago greeted her with a cool autumn rain. Taking a taxi to the hotel where the conference was to be held, Rachel checked in at the reception and went up to her room. She was given a modest single room on the 10th floor. A standard bed, a table, a TV, nothing special, but clean and comfortable. She unpacked her things, hung her suit in the closet, and checked the conference program. The first plenary session was starting in an hour. She needed to hurry. The hotel lobby and conference rooms were already crowded with dozens of healthcare workers from across the country. Doctors, physician assistants, nurses, researchers. Everyone was exchanging greetings, looking at name tags and city names. Rachel felt a little out of place. She wasn't a big fan of large crowds, especially unfamiliar ones. But there was nothing to be done. Her name tag read Rachel West, Pennsylvania C, Cleveland Clinic, and every now and then someone nodded or said hello to her. The morning and afternoon passed in a flurry of presentations. Rachel listened to experts on diabetes and hypertension, taking notes in a notebook. In between, she drank coffee and tried to make small talk with her tablemates, mostly polite, casual conversations about where people were from and how they were enjoying the conference. It was awkward at first, but she gradually got into it. The first day's program came to an end in the evening. The participants were treated to a buffet and informal socializing in the hotel restaurant. Rachel went up to her room to change. She swapped her formal suit for more comfortable dark blue trousers and a beige sweater. Looking in the mirror, she felt a strange sensation as if she had returned to her pre-blood youth, when she could simply go out into the city in the evening without thinking about children or household chores. "I'm at work," she reminded herself. No nonsense. When she went down to the restaurant, she found the room full of voices. Around the perimeter were tables with snacks, cheese plates, vegetables, glasses of champagne. In groups of 3 or 4 people, guests were chatting, laughing, and some were already actively pouring cocktails at the bar. Rachel was a little confused, not seeing any familiar faces. Her colleague Laura had disappeared somewhere. Perhaps she was talking to old acquaintances from other hospitals. Looking around, Rachel walked over to the refreshment table and poured herself a glass of mineral water, deciding to abstain from alcohol for now. At that moment, a friendly male voice was heard nearby. "Can you tell me what kind of sauce is on the vegetables? It looks like hummus, but I'm not sure." Rachel turned. A man in his 40s stood next to her, wearing a name tag. She quickly read, "Alex Garcia, instructor, Chicago Medical Training Center." He had dark hair and a short beard and was smiling an open, welcoming smile. "It looks like hummus," Rachel replied, glancing at the gravy boat, "although it might be some kind of chickpea dip or something." "Let's assume it's hummus," the stranger nodded. "Shall we try it?" He picked up a carrot stick, dipped it in, and tasted it. Rachel couldn't help but smile at his casualness. "Well, how is it?" "It's quite good," he announced. "If you like it, I recommend it." She also took a carrot and tried the sauce. It really was hummus with a garlicky flavor. "Yes, it's delicious," Rachel agreed. "By the way, I'm Alex." The man introduced himself, holding out his hand to her. "Rachel," she said, shaking his warm hand. "Are you from Chicago?" "Yes, a local," Alex confirmed. "I work as an emergency care instructor, training medical personnel to respond to critical situations." "Great," Rachel said, genuinely interested. "I'm from Cleveland, a physician assistant, internal medicine." "Pleased to meet you," Alex said. "First time at this conference." "Yes, I couldn't get out before, family, children," she said, and suddenly felt awkward. Why did she mention family? But Alex took it calmly. "I understand. I have a teenage daughter myself. She lives with her mother in Florida. I rarely see her. Family life is serious work. Rachel nodded, unsure of what to add. She took a sip of water to hide her embarrassment. Alex continued. And I attend this conference almost every year. I usually give master classes. This time, I'm leading a seminar tomorrow afternoon. Wow, she raised her eyebrows. And on what topic? Traffic injuries and emergency care, he explained. I used to work as a paramedic, now I teach others. This should be interesting, Rachel remarked. I hope it's not too boring, Alex smiled. Come if you have time. We'll try. They were silent for a moment, looking around. Rachel still felt the tension in this new company, but she liked Alex's company. He seemed easy, friendly. Would you like something to drink? He asked suddenly. I was going to have a glass of wine. She hesitated for a second. I think I could have some white. Great, I'll be right there. Alex headed for the bar. Rachel watched him go. He was half a head taller than her, with an athletic build. He's cute, she thought, and then she caught herself. Yes, he was nice to talk to, but that was all. She was married, a mother of two. Why would she even look at other men? Then again, what was wrong with chatting at a conference? It wasn't a crime. Alex returned with 2 glasses and handed her one. Your white wine, madam. Thank you, she smiled, accepting the glass. Let's drink to a successful conference. To a successful conference, he nodded, clinking glasses with her. The wine was surprisingly good. A warm feeling spread through her stomach. Rachel noticed the tension easing. She and Alex continued to talk about a little bit of everything. He was a great conversationalist with a good sense of humor. Rachel found herself laughing at his stories of funny incidents during staff training. An hour passed, then another. The room gradually emptied. Many participants, tired after the day, went to their rooms. But several of the most persistent groups were still sitting, chatting. Rachel and Alex moved from the common room closer to the bar, where it was quieter. She had already drunk her second glass of wine, feeling pleasantly relaxed. Of course, the alcohol was making her head spin a little, but she was not drunk, rather liberated. And now, imagine, this resident confuses adrenaline with atropine right during the simulation, Alex said, gesturing. It's good that it was a mannequin and not a real patient. Rachel shook her head. Horrible. But we all learned from our mistakes, I guess. Yes, but it's good if it's on other people's, he chuckled. There was a pause. Rachel glanced at her watch. It was almost 11 p.m. She suddenly realized that she had spent the entire evening in this man's company, and she felt good. It had been a long time since she had just chatted about everything without feeling the weight of responsibility. But at the same time, a wave of guilt arose. After all, Mark and the children were at home, and here she was relaxing with a strange man. It was probably time to end the evening. I have to get up early for classes tomorrow. It's late, she said uncertainly. I guess I should rest before tomorrow. Alex looked into her eyes. Something like disappointment flashed in his gaze, but he smiled. Of course, you still have to listen to reports all day. I think I'll go too. They stood up from the counter together. Rachel felt a little dizzy as she stepped onto the floor, the alcohol taking its toll. Are you okay? Alex asked immediately, supporting her by the elbow. Yes, I just felt dizzy, she hastened to assure. Let me walk you to the elevator, he offered. They walked out into the half-empty lobby. A couple of participants walked past, cheerfully arguing about something. Rachel and Alex silently headed to the elevators. They waited for about 10 seconds for the cabin to descend. She felt her heart beating faster than usual for some reason. Perhaps the stress of the day and the conversations was taking its toll. Listen, Alex suddenly said quietly, it was really nice meeting you. Rachel turned to him. At that moment, the elevator door opened. She stepped inside, Alex behind her. He continued, looking at the floor panel. I know you're married. I'm not trying to butt in. You're just a very pleasant conversationalist. Thank you, she answered just as quietly. The elevator doors closed, and they went up. Rachel pressed her 10th floor. Alex pressed the 12th. There was an awkward silence in the cramped space of the elevator. Rachel tried to figure out what to say. Her head was still spinning a little. She could feel the man's closeness. He smelled of light cologne and something else, maybe wine. "You have," Alex began, but fell silent. She looked at his reflection in the elevator mirror. He was looking at her, too. "What?" she asked quietly. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Rachel's heart sank. "You have beautiful eyes," Alex exhaled. She could have retreated, objected, reminded her about her husband and children. Everything inside her screamed that she couldn't cross that line. But the elevator was deliberately slow. Alex was standing right next to her, his hand sliding lightly over her forearm. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment. She hadn't allowed herself to think about men for so many years, and suddenly this moment, like an obsession. The bell rang and the elevator doors opened on the 10th floor. Rachel opened her eyes and stepped out. "Good night," she squeezed out, trying not to meet his eyes. But Alex also came out, holding the door with his hand so that it would not close. "Rachel." His voice sounded hoarse. She turned around, her heart pounding. They were completely alone here. The tension between them was almost palpable. Alex took another step, closing the distance. Now there was no more than half a meter between them. He slowly raised his hand and gently touched her cheek. "Are you sure you want me to go?" he asked, almost in a whisper. Rachel was barely aware of what happened next. She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. Alex gently pulled her toward him, and the next moment their lips touched. It was so unexpected, and yet so natural, as if they had both been waiting for it all evening. Rachel tasted the salty tears, either her own or imaginary. She was kissing a strange man in a hotel hallway, oblivious to everything else in the world. "Maybe we should go in," Alex whispered, breaking away for a second. Her heart was racing. She understood that she was doing something terrible, something irreparable. But her body seemed not to obey her mind. Blood was pulsing in her temples, her breathing was ragged. She led him to the door of her room with a trembling hand, taking out the key card. The door slammed behind them, cutting them off from the outside world. That night, Rachel crossed a line she had promised herself never to cross. In the morning, Rachel woke up with a persistent pounding in her temples and a nasty dry taste in her mouth. Her head was splitting, as if the wine from last night was getting to her. She had difficulty focusing her eyes and looked around. A gray strip of light was filtering through the loosely drawn curtains. The clock on the nightstand showed 6:30. The room was cool, the air conditioner humming somewhere behind the wall. Alex lay next to her on the rumpled sheet. He was asleep on his back, the blanket pulled up to his waist. His dark hair was tousled, and there was a mark on his cheek from the pillow. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, hoping that this was all a bad dream. But no, she was naked under the same blanket, and her body showed clear signs of the night. She had spent a slight ache in her muscles, the smell of sweat and someone else's cologne on her skin. A wave of shame and horror washed over her. "What have I done?" flashed through her mind. She had committed the most terrible betrayal of her life. Fragments of the night flashed before her inner eye. How she and Alex had stumbled to the bed, the heat of their kisses, the feverish shedding of clothes. Then passion mixed with tears, with some kind of desperate madness. Rachel suddenly realized that she was crying. Quiet tears were rolling down her cheeks. She had to leave, immediately. Before Alex woke up and saw her condition, she silently threw off the blanket and slid out of bed. Her things were lying on the chair next to the bed, a sweater, pants. Rachel dressed carefully, trying not to rustle the fabric. There was no underwear in sight apparently. It was left on the floor on the other side of the bed. But she did not risk climbing there so as not to wake the man. Alex stirred, rolled over onto his side. Rachel froze, her heart in her throat. But he continued to sleep, only muttering something in his sleep. She sighed in relief. The purse was on the nightstand at her side of the bed. Rachel peered inside to see if the room key was there, the phone. Yes, everything was there. Quietly, almost silently, she approached the door. His jacket was hanging on the back of the chair, An open condom wrapper was visible on the floor. This detail stung unpleasantly, so at least there had been some precaution, and yet it did not justify what had happened. Although, Rachel vaguely remembered that they had not immediately remembered about protection. The first time, it seemed, everything had happened so quickly and drunkenly that she closed her eyes, driving away these fragments. God, how could she? She turned the door handle, trying not to shake, just to get out and not see his face, not hear a word. It would be easier to pretend it never happened. She managed to slip out into the hallway, quietly closing the door behind her. The empty carpeted hallway greeted her with a deathly silence. Only now did Rachel realize that she was still sobbing, and she covered her mouth with her hand to keep from crying out loud. There was no time to waste. The conference was still going on, but she couldn't stay another day among these people. A suitcase was waiting for her in the room downstairs. She needed to pack her things and get home on the first flight. That evening, Rachel stood in the arrivals hall of the Cleveland airport, searching for familiar faces. Her heart was pounding, her palms were sweating. She didn't know how she would be able to look her husband in the eye, but she had to pull herself together and play her part for her family. "Mom!" came a joyful, childish cry. Sarah was running toward her, arms outstretched. Mark was walking next to her, holding a sleepy-looking Luke. Rachel smiled almost automatically and dropped to one knee to hug her daughter. "Hello, my dear." She hugged Sarah tightly, feeling her own lips trembling from the emotions that were overwhelming her. "Mommy, you took so long," the girl complained. "I missed you." "I missed you too, darling," Rachel whispered. Mark came closer, putting his youngest son down on the ground. Luke rubbed his eyes, but when he saw his mother, he beamed and immediately grabbed her leg. "Mom, don't leave again." "I won't, kitten," she exhaled, stroking his back. Then she looked up at her husband. Mark looked tired but pleased. "Hello," he said softly. "Hi," Rachel replied. They hugged awkwardly. Mark kissed her on the cheek. She wanted to sink into the ground with shame, but she only hugged the children tighter. On the way home, Mark drove and talked about the weekend, how he took Sarah to swimming class, how Luke was capricious at first without his mother, but then it was okay, he got used to it. Rachel listened with half an ear, nodding along. She tried to speak as usual, but inside everything was clenching. It seemed like she was branded, and that at any moment her husband would notice something was wrong. Every time he glanced at her in the rearview mirror, she nervously turned to the window. "How did the conference go?" Mark asked as they approached the house. "Not bad," Rachel answered cautiously. "Lots of useful lectures. I'm just very tired." "Well, you can rest tomorrow," he said. "I took the day off from work today to meet you, so I'll have to go back to the office tomorrow. Can you handle it?" "Of course," she nodded. "I'm used to it." He smiled. Soon they were home. The house greeted her with its usual cozy disarray, tiny shoes in the hallway, toys scattered on the living room couch. It was as if she had only been gone a couple of hours, not 3 days. Rachel thought painfully that this was how it should be. She should have returned, brought gifts for the children, and calmly went to bed with her husband, knowing that she was a reliable wife and mother. But in reality, she held back her tears, went up to the second floor under the pretext of unpacking. In the bedroom, closing the door, Rachel finally allowed herself to exhale. She had almost no strength left to stay cheerful. She just wanted to lie down and cry. But she couldn't. She had to go cook dinner, put the children to bed. With these thoughts, she resolutely wiped her eyes and began to take things out of the suitcase. At the very bottom, she noticed her beige sweater, the same one she had been wearing that night, folded into a bag. Rachel frantically threw the clothes into the laundry basket, as if that was how she could get rid of the memories. A week passed. On the surface, everything had improved. Life had returned to its usual course. In the morning, Rachel took the children to school and kindergarten, worked at the clinic during the day, cooked dinner, and read books to the kids in the evening. Mark seemed to suspect nothing. He behaved as usual, asking how her day went, discussing the news. Twice that week, he tried to initiate intimacy at night, but Rachel avoided it under some pretext. Once she cited poor health, the other time fatigue. She understood that this would not last long. Mark was already beginning to look at her with concern. He clearly did not understand what was happening to his wife, but he was in no hurry to ask questions directly. Apparently, he decided that she was simply overworked and gave her time. Rachel was grateful for this silent understanding. She needed to come to her senses and decide how to live on. Should she confess everything? This thought did not give her peace. On the one hand, the lie was eating her up from the inside. On the other, the truth would destroy their family. The children, Mark. She saw how her husband carefully adjusted the blanket on the sleeping Sarah, how he fed Luke breakfast, making fun of his face smeared with porridge. He did not deserve such a blow. Maybe it was better to keep the secret to herself and just be an ideal wife from now on, atoning for her guilt with care. But all these painful thoughts soon faded into the background in front of a more pressing problem. At the end of the following week, after returning from Chicago, Rachel began to feel strange discomfort. At first, a slight burning sensation when urinating. She thought that perhaps she had caught cystitis, not uncommon after stress and flights. She drank cranberry juice, warm tea, and tried to rest more. For a couple of days, it seemed to get better. But then new symptoms appeared that made her feel cold inside. Her heart sank. This had never happened to her before. It could mean one of two things, either a severe bacterial infection of the urinary tract or something sexually transmitted. Rachel turned off the water with a trembling hand and stepped out of the shower stall. Her head was buzzing. Of course, knowledge of medicine in this situation was not a blessing, but a curse. She immediately remembered all the possible diagnoses. Now it seemed that she herself had joined the ranks of the infected. She felt sick. She sat down on the toilet lid, trying to collect her thoughts. Just don't panic, she ordered herself. Everything was solvable. She needed to get tested as soon as possible. Perhaps this was a false alarm or something not serious. But there was little hope, for that the symptoms were too typical. Coming out of the bathroom, she mechanically continued her morning preparations. Mark had already taken the children to breakfast, so she was able to quickly get dressed and go down to the kitchen. She didn't feel like eating at all, but she had to pretend. She poured herself some coffee and took a bite of toast. Her husband noticed her paleness. "Are you feeling okay?" "Yeah, I just didn't get enough sleep." Rachel waved it off. "Maybe you should take a day off?" he suggested, frowning. No, everything is fine. I'll go to bed early today, that's all." She smiled hard. Rachel fought panic the entire way to the clinic. She had to figure out how to get tested without anyone she knew finding out. She was embarrassed to go to her doctors. The clinic knew her and her husband too well. The only way out was to get tested anonymously elsewhere. By midday, she had already firmly decided. Today, right after work, she would go to a clinic in another part of the city. There, she could take tests confidentially and get the results quickly. There was no time to waste. If this was what she thought, she needed to get treatment quickly before complications began. There was only one thing left: what to do with Mark. If the diagnosis is confirmed. No, it's too early to think about that. First, tests, and then we'll see. With that thought in mind, Rachel clenched her teeth and went back to work, mechanically smiling at her patients and issuing the usual recommendations. But inside, everything was turning upside down. Fear, guilt, and shame were eating away at her from the inside. At 5:45 p.m. that same day, Rachel, dressed in jeans and a jacket, stood at the entrance to a Planned Parenthood clinic on the other side of town. She knew no one in the area, and it was unlikely she would meet anyone she knew. The gray brick building was unremarkable, with only a small sign above the entrance. A young couple sat on a bench near the door, talking quietly. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to stop her hands from shaking, and walked inside. At the reception, she was met by a middle-aged woman with a friendly smile. "Good evening. How can we help you?" Rachel felt her throat go dry. For some reason, saying the reason for her visit out loud was especially difficult. She leaned closer, trying to keep her voice down. "I would like to get tested for sexually transmitted infections." The receptionist seemed accustomed to confidentiality and simply nodded understandingly. Of course, we have a free window right now. Please fill out this form. She handed over a clipboard with a form on it. Rachel walked to the corner of the room and sat down on a plastic chair, taking a pen. She had to fill out the form in English: name, date of birth, any allergies to medications, what tests she wanted to take. She checked off the boxes. Her head was pounding. Is this really happening to me? She handed the form back and sat down to wait for the call. The reception area was quiet. Only the air conditioner was on and soft music was barely audible from the speakers. There were posters on the wall calling for HIV testing and the use of condoms. Rachel lowered her eyes. She wanted to disappear. About 10 minutes later, the door to the corridor opened and a nurse in a blue uniform called out, "Rachel." She stood up and followed her sister into the examination room. A small office, a couch, a doctor's table. The nurse asked her to sit down, measured her blood pressure, pulse, and asked, "What brings you here today?" Rachel swallowed. "I need to get tested. I suspect I might have been infected." The nurse wrote something down on the computer. "Did you have any symptoms?" "Yes, unusual discharge, burning," she squeezed out. "I see. Was there unprotected sex?" Even though the questions were standard, Rachel felt herself blush. "Yes, once," she almost whispered. The nurse nodded slightly, continuing to type. "Got it. We usually recommend comprehensive testing." "That's it, please," Rachel replied. "Okay, then we'll take a swab and blood sample from you," the nurse said evenly. "Depending on how busy the lab is, the results will be ready in 2 to 3 days. But if you have symptoms, we can offer preventative treatment right away without waiting for the results." "Treatment?" Rachel asked. "Yes, the standard treatment is 1 antibiotic injection and pills. Even if the tests come back negative, antibiotics won't hurt. But it's up to you." Rachel thought for a moment. On the one hand, as a doctor, she knew that the sooner she started treatment, the better. On the other hand, the injection. It meant admitting that she was definitely infected, but there seemed to be little doubt. "I think so. Let's start the treatment," she said quietly. The procedure took about half an hour. The doctor came a short, dark-skinned woman of about 40. She carefully asked Rachel about her symptoms and contacts. Rachel tried to answer calmly, in a businesslike manner, hiding personal details. She only said that the contact had been about 2 weeks ago, casual, the partner was new, and that she had a regular partner at home with whom she had not had sex since then. The doctor noted the latter approvingly. "It's good that you're abstaining. Your partner will also need to undergo treatment if the infection is confirmed." The phrase stung, but Rachel only nodded. "I understand. Okay, let's see what we have." The doctor took a disposable sterile kit. "Now I'll take a smear. It will be a little uncomfortable. Try to relax." Rachel lay down on the examination chair behind the screen as instructed. She closed her eyes as the doctor performed the manipulations. It all seemed surreal. Here she was, a mother of 2, a decent wife, lying in a clinic because of her own stupidity. She wanted to disappear into the ground. After the smear, they took blood from a vein. The nurse acted quickly and carefully. It was obvious that they had it on stream. Finally, the doctor returned with the medicine. "Now I'll give you an injection. It's an antibiotic. It's a little painful, but quick." Rachel nodded silently and rolled onto her side, exposing her upper thigh. The injection was indeed unpleasant, a searing pain spreading through the muscle. She gritted her teeth, but endured it. "Excellent." The doctor removed the syringe. "And here's another pill. Take it now." She was handed a plastic cup with a large tablet and water. Rachel obediently drank it. "Good. You have received standard treatment," the doctor summed up. "You will feel better in a few days, but be sure to complete the course if we prescribe you anything additional after the results, and refrain from sexual intercourse until it is clear that you are healthy. Your partner will also need preventive treatment. Will you be able to give him the medication yourself, or will he prefer to contact his doctor?" Rachel swallowed hard. "I will pass it on. That is, I will talk to him. I understand that this is a delicate situation, the doctor said softly, looking at Rachel for the first time, not only professionally, but also with a touch of sympathy. But health comes first. Try to explain to him the need for treatment. Yes, of course, she nodded quickly, lowering her eyes. That was the end of the appointment. Rachel said goodbye and left the office, feeling slightly dizzy either from stress or from the realization of the full reality of what was happening. She was given a memo and a small package. Inside were 2 sealed blisters with antibiotics for her partner. Apparently, the doctor decided to play it safe and provide Mark with treatment in advance. Stepping outside, Rachel took a breath of the cool evening air. Her body ached, and the injection site throbbed with a dull ache. She sank into the seat of her car and burst into tears. It was the first time she had ever let herself cry, and fortunately the parking lot was deserted in the gathering darkness. Everything was falling apart. One crazy move on her part was now threatening to tear her family apart. Rachel knew she had to tell her husband she couldn't hide something like this, especially now that she had to treat him too. But the thought was terrifying. How could she look him in the eye and say, "Darling, I cheated on you"? How? And most importantly, what would happen next? Would he leave? Curse her? Would he ever tell the children? No, the thought of children was too terrifying. The tears were drying. She sat, leaning her forehead against the steering wheel, until she felt that she had calmed down a little. The clock showed 19:10. They were waiting for her at home. Mark had probably already picked up the children from their grandmother. In order to calmly stop by for tests, Rachel lied to him that she was late at work and asked her mother-in-law to cover for the children until the evening. Now she had to go back and pretend that everything was as usual. 2 days passed in agonizing anticipation. Rachel continued to go to work and smile at her family at home, but inside she was on the verge of a breakdown. The only thing that saved her was that the course of antibiotics was already working. The symptoms were starting to subside, the burning was almost gone. But she knew that she couldn't wait any longer without talking to her husband. On Friday afternoon, while she was having lunch in the staff room, a notification came on her phone. Her heart sank. The test results were ready. With trembling fingers, she opened the link to the lab portal. Positive. Although it wasn't a surprise, reading the confirmation was like being hit. There it was, in black and white. The stigma. She couldn't look at the screen for long. Wiping the tears from her cheeks, Rachel decided there was no more delay. Tonight she would talk to Mark. Better a terrible end than endless horror, that's what her father used to say. She imagined her husband's eyes when he found out. It would be hard, but there was no other way out. Friday evening dragged on painfully long. Rachel felt like a prisoner awaiting execution. After work, she picked up the children from her mother-in-law and returned home. Mark arrived a little later than usual, tired, but in a good mood, apparently happy about the coming weekend. He kissed Rachel on the cheek, hugged the children. She responded to his caresses with a wooden smile. Her heart was pounding somewhere in her throat. Here it is, the time X. She barely touched her food at dinner. Mark remarked, "You don't eat anything at all. Still feeling unwell?" "A little," Rachel answered evasively. "I'll go to bed early tonight." "Maybe we should watch a movie after the kids go to bed," the husband suggested, spearing spaghetti with his fork. I downloaded a new detective story. These simple, normal words almost took her breath away. How she wanted to agree and dive into the familiar comfort. The children were put to bed. She and Mark were on the couch in front of the TV. But no, that bridge was burned. "Mark," she said quietly, trying to speak evenly, "we need to talk. Later, when the kids are asleep." The husband raised his eyebrows, surprised by the seriousness of her tone. Of course, he placed his hand on her palm. "Is everything okay?" Rachel quickly pulled her hand under the table, unable to withstand his caring touch. "Later, okay?" was all she could say. "Okay," Mark said warily. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Rachel played mechanically with the children, helped Sarah pack her backpack for the next day's art class. She tried not to make eye contact with her husband. He, too, was walking around gloomier than a thundercloud, apparently beginning to wind himself up with thoughts about the upcoming conversation. At 9 p.m. Luke was finally put to bed, then Sarah. The girl climbed into bed, casting a worried glance at her parents. "Didn't you have a fight? You're weird." "No, no, everything's fine, honey," Rachel hastened to assure her, adjusting the blanket. "Sleep." She kissed her daughter on the forehead and turned off the nightlight. The nursery door closed quietly. On the stairs down, Mark suddenly touched his wife's elbow. "Rachel, you're scaring me." "What happened?" His voice was agitated. He was obviously expecting anything, maybe bad news about his health or something. In a way, he was right. Rachel felt she couldn't wait any longer. She motioned for him to come into the living room. There, in the semi-darkness, they sat on the sofa. Mark looked at her expectantly. His face was half in shadow, but there was tension in his eyes. For a few seconds, Rachel braced herself, mustering all her willpower. Once she said A, she had to say B. "Remember, I went to a conference. In Chicago?" She began in a hoarse whisper. "Of course I remember." Mark became wary. "What does she have to do with it?" Rachel clenched her fingers so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She found it hard to breathe. "Something happened there," she said with an effort. "Something that shouldn't have happened." Mark frowned, trying to understand. She could see the thoughts flashing through his mind, but apparently the worst one hadn't occurred to him yet. "What happened?" he demanded. "Speak plainly, Rachel." Her throat constricted. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Tears welled up in her eyes. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake," she whispered at last. "I cheated on you, Mark." There was silence. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, counting the beats of her heart. Mark sat there shocked, unable to utter a word. "What?" he whispered almost silently, as if he couldn't believe his ears. Rachel closed her eyes, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. Please know it was a one-time thing. I don't know what came over me." She began to babble incoherently, but Mark cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Wait, you cheated on me in Chicago?" His voice grew stronger with each word. Rachel nodded, unable to speak, her chest torn with pain and shame. "With whom?" he almost shouted, rising to his feet. "Who is he?" "Nobody. Just a guy from the conference," she sobbed. "An instructor. We drank. I don't understand how. It didn't mean anything, Mark." "It didn't mean anything," he mimicked with a bitter grin. "You slept with some bastard at a conference, and it didn't mean anything." He paced the room, clutching his head. Rachel looked at her husband in horror. She had never seen him in such a state. His face was distorted, his eyes sparkled with rage and pain. "How could you?" he cried out through his teeth. "I'm at home with the kids, and you. Damn it." He slammed his fist on the closet door. It slammed loudly, echoing loudly. Rachel winced. "I'm so sorry," she began again, getting up from the sofa. "I don't know what to say. I'm terribly guilty." "Guilty? You have no idea." He turned to her, his distorted face burning. "This is disgusting, Rachel. I never would have thought." He paced back and forth a few more times, trying to pull himself together. Then he gave her a look that scared her, disgust and bitterness mixed in it. Did you even use protection?" he asked sharply. Rachel felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. This was the moment of truth. "No," she answered barely audibly. Mark swore briefly and kicked a child's ball on the floor. It flew into the corner. "Excellent. Just wonderful," he said sarcastically. "So not only did you sleep with the first guy you met, but you did it without protection." "It was an accident, Rachel tried to explain, but he wasn't listening. "Do you even understand what you could have infected me with?" Mark growled, approaching her again. "I got tested," she blurted out. "Yesterday, I got tested because..." "Because?" He leaned forward. He smelled of sweat. His face was flushed with anger. "Because there was a reason to check, right? Did you catch something? Rachel couldn't take it anymore and burst into tears. Yes, Mark. The husband recoiled as if she had struck him. There was a deafening silence. Only her sobs broke it. Damn it. He finally whispered and covered his face with his hands. Rachel stood there, covering her mouth with her hand, trying to stop herself from sobbing. It was worse than she had imagined. Mark sat on the edge of his chair, breathing heavily, looking at the floor. Then his gaze fell on the small first aid kit that Rachel had brought from the clinic and placed on the coffee table earlier. He seemed to notice it only now. "What is this?" he asked dully. "Medicine," she sobbed. "Antibiotics. For you, so that you can be treated too." Mark gave a short, bitter laugh. "Fantastic. So you infected me, and now you've generously brought me a cure. I don't know if I infected you. I tried not to." She tried to speak, but he stood up and she backed away. "Don't come near me," he suddenly said. Rachel froze. Mark looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. "Do you understand what you've done?" he asked quietly. "You've ruined everything, our whole life." "Please forgive me," she sobbed. "I know it's unforgivable, but I love you, the children, I'll fix everything. Just give me a chance." "Will you fix it?" He started to shout again, but stopped himself, glancing at the ceiling where the children were sleeping. He must have remembered them, and that sobered him up a bit. He switched to a furious whisper. "How will you fix this, Rachel? Will you be branded traitor on your forehead or what?" She was silent, covering her face with her hands. She was shaking. Mark paced the room, trying to speak more quietly. "I trusted you, damn it. Never doubted you for a second. And you, with the first person you met. It was one time," she moaned. "I swear, never again." "I don't care how many times," he waved it off. "1 or 10, what's the difference? The fact is the same." They were silent for a few minutes. Rachel sank down onto the couch, feeling like her legs were giving out. Mark stopped by the window, turning away, holding the windowsill with his hands. His breathing gradually evened out. "And how long were you going to hide this from me, if it weren't for the illness?" he suddenly asked hoarsely, without turning around. Rachel closed her eyes. This was the question she had been dreading. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I wanted to forget, to pretend that nothing happened." He chuckled. "So, if it weren't for this illness, I would have lived in blissful ignorance for the rest of my days." She remained silent, biting her lips. "Oh my God." Mark hit the wall with his palm, but not so hard, more in despair. "How disgusting." He turned sharply, his gaze cold and hard. "Get ready," he said briefly. Rachel didn't understand. "What?" "Pack your things and get out of the house. Right now." Her heart sank. No, not that. Her mind knew it had a right, but her heart clenched in pain. "Mark, please, let's not rush. This is your house, and mine, and the children's. Where would I go now at night?" she babbled, hoping for his reasonableness. The husband looked without blinking. "I don't care. I can't see you." He began to pace the room again, then suddenly stopped. "No, wait. Children. They don't know anything. You're right. There's no need to wake them up." Rachel nodded through her tears. "Let's at least wait until the morning." Mark angrily pulled off his sweater and threw it on the chair. "Okay? Spend the night in the guest room. I don't want you here in the morning." These words echoed in her ears. She wanted to say something else, to beg, but the sight of his hunched back, his drooping shoulders suddenly stopped her. Any phrase she said now would be superfluous. She had already caused him too much pain. "Okay," Rachel whispered barely audibly. "I'll leave in the morning." Mark didn't answer. He stood by the window, his back turned. In the dim light of the street lamp, only his profile was visible. It looked as if he were crying, or at least fighting back tears. But she couldn't be sure. Rachel rose slowly and staggered toward the stairs. Mark's quiet voice came from behind her. "Tomorrow we'll talk about what we'll tell the children." She didn't have the courage to answer. She silently went upstairs and into the spare guest room. Her legs were wobbly. That night she barely slept. Tears flowed silently into her pillow, and her temples throbbed with emptiness. Somewhere beyond the wall, in their marital bedroom, was her husband, probably also sleepless, exhausted. They were strangers now. Saturday morning began with a tense silence. Rachel had not come down for breakfast. She quietly packed her things into a duffel bag in the guest room, listening to the sounds coming from the kitchen. The children and Mark were busy their fragments of conversation, the clatter of dishes. Usually on Saturdays, the whole family would make pancakes and joke. Today, there was no laughter. Rachel packed the essentials, several sets of clothes, toiletries, a laptop. The bag was barely half full. She hadn't known how far she was going. Her heart was heavy. When it became clear that she couldn't wait any longer, she went downstairs. Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, staring sullenly into his coffee. The children were finishing their breakfast, Sarah picking at a half-eaten pancake with her fork, Luke drawing patterns on his plate with syrup. When Mom appeared, both of them perked up. "Mom!" Luke tried to get off the chair and run to her. Rachel forced a smile and gestured for him to sit. "Hello, my dear," she said quietly. Mark looked up. His face was tired. He had hardly slept more than she had that night. His gaze immediately went to the bag in her hand. His lips pressed together, but he said nothing. Sarah frowned when she noticed the bag. "Mom, are you going somewhere?" This was the moment Rachel had been dreading. She and Mark had spoken early that morning. They had decided not to tell the children the truth, at least for now. But what to say instead? "Children." She began and stopped. Her throat was dry. Mark stood up and put his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Mom needs to live separately for a while, guys." Sarah's eyes widened. "Why? Did you have a fight?" Mark pressed his lips together. Rachel could see how hard it was for him. She intervened. Yeah, we had a little fight," she said softly. "But we love you and your brother very much. Mommy just needs to stay with Grandma for a few days." "I'm with you," Luke suddenly exclaimed, jumping up. "I want to go to Grandma's too." Rachel leaned down and hugged her son. "No, baby. You'll stay at home with Dad. You have a kindergarten. The toys are here." Luke immediately pouted. "I don't want to be with Dad. I want to be with you." These words cut painfully. Mark looked away, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I'll come see you often, I promise," Rachel added quickly, patting her son on the back. "And you and Dad can come visit me at Grandma's too." "We'll go on the weekend if you want, buddy," Mark quietly interjected, trying to speak evenly. Luke stood there frowning for another minute, then climbed back onto his chair by his plate, finding it hard to comprehend what was going on. Sarah, more sensitive, looked first at her mother, then at her father, and suddenly asked, "Will you get divorced?" Rachel's heart sank. Mark was clearly taken aback. "No, what are you saying?" he muttered uncertainly. "We just need a little time." Sarah frowned. Tommy's parents separated at school and then got divorced. "Sarah, don't make things up," Mark said sharply, perhaps too sharply. The girl bit her lip. Rachel stroked her daughter's head. "Honey, nothing is known now. Everything will be fine." But it didn't sound very convincing. About 10 minutes later, when the children had gone to play in the living room, Rachel and Mark were left alone in the kitchen. Both were silent. Finally, she asked quietly, "Have you decided? How will we proceed? I mean, the schedule. I can come pick them up from school or kindergarten." Mark shook his head. "Not yet. I can handle it myself." "But you have to go to work," she objected. He shrugged. "I'll take time off or work remotely for a few days. I'll figure it out." Rachel nodded, looking down. He didn't want to accept her help. He was too angry. "And you? To your mother?" he asked dryly. "Yes," she answered. "I called. She told me to come." Mark smiled wryly. "Well, say hi." There was bitterness in his tone. He was probably ashamed in front of his mother-in-law for this whole nightmare, although the blame lay with Rachel. "Mark," she said quietly, "I understand your anger, but maybe, should we go to a counselor later? Well, a family psychologist. Just once, just to talk." He looked at her as if she had suggested something out of the ordinary. "Are you serious?" he said hoarsely. "After that?" Rachel looked down. People sometimes cope, for the sake of the family. "I'm not ready for any therapy right now," he snapped. "I need to come to my senses." "Okay," she whispered. They fell silent again. Mark nervously tapped his fingers on the tabletop, then firmly stated, "I'll tell Sean everything." Rachel looked up in surprise. For what? Sean had been his close friend, practically his best friend, since college. "I need to talk to someone or I'll go crazy," Mark explained grimly. "Sean knows how to keep his mouth shut." Rachel just nodded. She had no right to object. She wanted to pour out her heart to someone too, but no one came to mind except the therapist. She had almost no friends except for her colleague Laura, but she was more of a friend. Besides, shame did not allow it. Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Mom, are you leaving already?" Rachel's heart sank painfully. She forced a smile. "Yes, honey, I have to go." Her daughter ran up to hug her. Rachel held the girl tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of baby shampoo and waffles. No words would suffice right now, so she remained silent. A moment later, Luke appeared next to me and grabbed my mother's leg. "Mom, come back soon," he asked. "Of course, my dear," her voice trembled. "You can always call me, and we'll see each other tomorrow, okay? I'll stop by." The children nodded, not letting go of her. Finally, Rachel forced herself to unhook their hands. She stood up and looked at Mark. He was standing to the side, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes averted. She wished he'd say goodbye, but he was silent. "I will go," Rachel said into the void. "Go ahead," Mark responded briefly. She turned and walked out into the hallway. Pulling on her coat, she furtively wiped away the tears that had welled up. The children ran out after her. Sarah wanted to help her mother carry her bag to the car, and Luke simply tagged along, not fully understanding what was going on. Mark stood in the doorway of the house and watched as Rachel put her bag in the trunk. She hugged both children one last time, covering their faces with kisses. "I love you very much," she whispered. "Listen to your dad, okay?" Sarah nodded, wiping her nose with her sleeve. Luke just sniffled, trying to cry again. "Okay, go home or you'll catch a cold," Rachel said. The children trudged toward the porch where Mark stood. He held them back, his eyes fixed on Rachel. His gaze was dull, but without the old rage, only weariness. Their eyes met for a moment. Rachel tried to read something in that silent moment: hope, forgiveness, or finality, but Mark's face remained impassive. She got into the car and started the engine. The two small figures and the tall figure of her husband behind them gradually receded in the mirror. As the house disappeared around the bend in the street, Rachel burst into tears, her forehead resting on the steering wheel on the side of the road. That evening, after putting the children to bed at their mother's, Mark broke free for the first time to be alone with his thoughts. He got into the car and drove to the river. It was already dark. Autumn twilight had fallen on the city. With his hands tightly clenched on the steering wheel, Mark sat, staring at the black water outside the window, and tried to sort out the chaos of thoughts and feelings. Anger, pain, humiliation all mixed up inside him. He replayed the details of yesterday's conversation over and over again. Rachel admitting, "I cheated on you." And immediately the images came to mind, his wife with some other man. Mark closed his eyes, feeling the very thought of it make him shudder. How could she? Why? The phone vibrated. Mark jumped out of his heavy thoughts. A name appeared on the screen: Sean. He remembered that in the morning, barely recovered from the shock, he sent his best friend a message: "Need to talk. This is urgent." And now Sean was finally calling back. Mark took a deep breath and replied, "Hello." "Hey, buddy," Sean's voice sounded a little worried. "What's wrong? You don't sound well." Not really, yeah," Mark admitted, trying to control the tremor in his voice. "Listen, can you meet? Right now, if possible. It's important." "Of course. Where are you?" "In the parking lot by the embankment, near the old pier," Mark said. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Sean responded without further questions. Mark hung up and leaned back in his seat. The lump in his throat came again. He closed his eyes, remembering the happy moments, his wedding with Rachel, the birth of Sarah, then Luke. All these years he thought that they had a strong family. Yes, everyday life and routine, less romance, but the love was still there. Or was it? He went over the last months in his mind. Had he missed something? Were there any signs? Rachel was often tired, sometimes distant, but he attributed it to work, to worries. Not for a second did he consider that she was capable of betrayal. About 20 minutes later, Sean's black sedan pulled up to his car. Mark got out to greet his friend. Sean, a tall, strong guy with a short haircut, walked quickly toward him, clearly worried. "Damn, Mark, you're scaring me," he began from the doorway, looking at his friend. "What happened?" Mark felt tears welling up in his eyes. He hadn't cried in front of Rachel yesterday. He had held back, but now, seeing his old friend, he almost broke down. He turned away, trying to pull himself together. "Let's go for a walk," he said quietly. They walked along the deserted embankment, Sean waiting patiently for Mark to speak first. Finally, Mark was able to squeeze out. "She cheated on me, Sean." "Who? Rachel?" He didn't understand at first. "Yes," the voice broke. "A random guy at a conference." Sean stopped. "Wow." Mark smiled bitterly. "That's exactly it." "Are you sure?" the friend exhaled. "She admitted it herself." Mark nodded. Sean cursed under his breath and clenched his fists. "Damn it, I'm sorry. I was just shocked." Mark sat down wearily on the low concrete fence by the river bank. Sean sat down next to him. "Tell me from the beginning," he asked more calmly. And Mark told her. How she went to a conference, how she was not herself after returning, how she later confessed to cheating and infection. He even pulled out of his pocket those very antibiotic tablets that Rachel had brought and threw them on the ground. "Damn it, she brought an infection to my home, and she also graciously brought treatment." Sean whistled softly. "This is brutal. Have you taken it already?" "Not yet," Mark waved it off. "I can't swallow that crap she gave me. I'd better go get some tests done tomorrow. See a doctor. Let them prescribe something normal." Sean nodded. "Probably it's more correct. But dude, the main thing is not even the disease, but the fact itself." Mark nodded silently, staring at the dark water. The friends sat in silence for a minute. "How are you? What do you plan to do?" Sean asked cautiously. Mark shook his head. "I have no idea. She moved in with her parents today. I told her to get out." "I understand," the friend said quietly. "The kids don't really know anything. They think mom's just visiting grandma. Sarah's smart, though. She guesses something." Mark ran his hands over his face. "Oh, God, the kids." "Yeah," Sean sighed. "It makes it difficult." Mark felt a surge of anger. "If it weren't for the kids, I wouldn't even talk to her anymore. Scum." He spat over his shoulder. "How could she betray us like that?" Sean patted him on the shoulder sympathetically. "I always thought you were the perfect couple. I would never have guessed Rachel." "Me too," Mark smiled bitterly, "even in my worst nightmare." Sean thought for a moment, then said cautiously, "Listen, what if? Well, anything can happen. Maybe you yourself offended her somehow. I'm not saying this as an excuse, I just—" Mark frowned. "How? I didn't drink, I didn't go out, I brought money into the house, I helped with the kids. Bed, well, maybe we got less frequent, but she didn't complain." "Yeah, you're our father of the year," Sean confirmed with a weak smile. "I'm just trying to figure out what went off in her head." "It's no use," Mark waved it off. "She says to herself that she doesn't know what's happened. Nonsense. Maybe she was going through some kind of crisis. She's 30-something years old, has 2 children, and is tired." A friend suggested. Mark shrugged. "If every tired woman sleeps on the side, then what?" He fell silent. The wind blew cold into his face. "Do you think that's it, the end?" Sean asked quietly. Mark did not answer for a long time. Somewhere on the other bank lights flared up a night barge crane was loading goods. Probably yes, he finally said. I can't imagine living with her any longer. Every time I see her, I remember her. And how can I trust her after that? That makes sense, Sean sighed. Although, it's not for me to judge. People sometimes forgive, they say. Mark shook his head. I'm not a saint. I can't. And, I don't even want to try now. It's like I've been turned inside out. Sean nodded. The main thing is, don't make any sudden moves yet, he said. Well, maybe you'll have to run and file a complaint or something. Take your time. I'm not planning to yet, Mark replied. We need to think about the children. What's best for them? Sean put his arm around his shoulders. Yes, it's not all at once. Mark fell silent. They sat for a few minutes, listening to the splash of water against the concrete slabs. She asked me to go to a family psychologist, Mark suddenly said. Sean raised his eyebrows in surprise. And you? I sent this idea, Mark said gloomily. But maybe it makes sense, not to save, but at least to get things in order in my head, and for the children. Perhaps, the friend agreed. A competent psychologist will help you decide what to do next, even if you break up. Mark looked up at his friend. Could you forgive something like that? Sean thought. I don't know, Mark. Honestly, probably. Hardly. Especially betrayal with illness to boot. Mark smiled bitterly. Yeah, that's what it's called, a bonus. He covered his face with his hands. Lord, what life has brought me to. Yesterday, I thought everything was fine with me. I'm so sorry, brother, Sean said quietly. But hang in there. Liz and I will help out any way we can, babysit or whatever. Mark nodded his thanks. My mom is in shock. I didn't really explain it to her, but she guesses, he added. Today, I brought the kids to her and explained as best I could that we had a fight. What did she say? Nothing, just sighed. But I think he'll ask later. Sean shook his head. It's not easy for you. I can handle it, Mark answered hoarsely, not entirely sure of it himself. They sat for another half hour, discussing everyday issues. Mark shared that he took a week off from work. Fortunately, the management would understand the situation. He referred to family circumstances. Sean promised to cover for him, if anything. He was also in a leadership position at their company. When the conversation had run its course, the friends hugged goodbye. Sean once again assured them that he was ready to help. Mark, grateful for the support, felt a little lighter. At least he had let out some of the pain. But when he returned to the empty house at night, the weight fell upon him again. Without the children and Rachel, the house seemed strange and quiet. Mark wandered through the darkened rooms. Luke's forgotten toy car lay on the living room floor. Sarah's pink blanket lay on the sofa. All these little things painfully reminded him of his old life. He walked into the bedroom automatically. On the nightstand was a photograph of him and Rachel hugging on the beach, happy and young. Mark sat down heavily on the edge of the bed and picked up the photograph. His heart sank with a sharp pain. He looked at their smiling faces for a long time. Then, with unexpected fury, he threw the frame against the wall. The glass shattered loudly, splitting the photograph in two. Mark and Rachel were now separated by a zigzag crack. Glass shards fell to the floor. Mark put his head in his hands and burst into tears. These silent sobs shook him more and more. The pain of loss, betrayal, loneliness, everything was spilling out. When the tears dried up, he felt empty. He needed to try to sleep. Tomorrow he had a difficult explanation with his mother and, perhaps, a new round of questions from the children. He stood up, wiping his wet face with his sleeve. There was a phone on the floor next to the bed. The screen was flashing with notifications. Mark picked it up and looked at it. One new message from Rachel, a couple of hours old. He opened it, even though he knew he shouldn't. I'm at my parents'. If you need anything, let me know. I love children. I'm sorry. Mark smiled wryly. Sorry. Easy to say. He pressed the answer key, but couldn't think of any words. Not a single polite phrase could be found. In the end, He simply turned off the screen and threw the phone on the bed. Maybe someday, but not now. Having undressed with difficulty, Mark lay down on the cold half of the empty bed and stared at the ceiling. His life had been turned upside down in the last 2 days. Only one thought was spinning in his head. What now? He didn't know the answer. The weeks that followed the separation dragged on painfully long for Rachel. Each new day began with a hard awakening. For a few seconds, between sleep and reality, it seemed to her that everything was as before. But reality quickly returned. She was no longer at home, not next to her husband and children, but in a teenager's room, which was her old bedroom. And this was not a temporary inconvenience, as it happened during renovations or vacations, but a consequence of her own actions. Rachel lived with her parents, feeling like a complete failure. Mom and Dad tried to support her. Mom cooked her favorite chicken soup, tried to distract her with conversation. But Rachel could hardly eat and suffered from insomnia. She lost several kilograms in just a couple of weeks. Her father was worried that his daughter was completely beside herself, and even offered to have a glass of whiskey with him one evening to relieve stress. But the taste of alcohol only made Rachel feel sick. The memory of that ill-fated drinking session in Chicago was too fresh. She tried to see the children as often as possible, although this was not easy. During the first week, Mark, avoiding personal meetings, brought the children to her parents every other day for a couple of hours. Usually, he just dropped them off at the porch and left without even going inside. Rachel hugged the children, trying to hide her tear-stained eyes from them. They played in the living room with their grandmother, baked cookies, and drew. Sarah asked directly several times when her mother would come home. Rachel gently answered that she did not know yet, but really wanted to. Luke simply hung on her, hugging her like a little bear, and constantly pulled, "Mom, let's go home." Rachel had to hold back her tears every time, explaining that for now she was living here. At night, when she was alone, she was tossed about in tormenting thoughts. Endless if-onlys haunted her. If only she hadn't gone to that conference. If only she hadn't gone to that damn buffet. If only she had held on to the elevator. Everything would be like before. The children would be calm, Mark would be smiling like before. But nothing could be returned. There was a tiny hope left to try to fix everything. But how? Mark still refused to talk. For 2 weeks, he hadn't called once himself, only exchanged brief messages about the children. If Rachel tried to talk about the two of them, he either didn't answer or sent an irritation. Not now. One particularly depressing day, Rachel decided she couldn't stand it alone. She needed professional help, if only to talk things out. And since Mark wouldn't go to couples therapy, she decided to start with herself. Through her doctor friends, she found out the contacts of a good psychologist who specialized in family crises. And one day, when the children were at school and kindergarten, and she was sitting idle at her parents', Rachel signed up for an individual consultation. In the office of the psychologist, an elderly woman with a soft voice, Rachel burst into tears after just 5 minutes, barely having begun to tell her story. She felt ashamed, as if she would be judged, but the doctor only listened quietly and attentively, handing her a box of tissues. An hour into the conversation, Rachel relaxed a little. She was finally able to speak out without fear of judgment. She told everything about the long-standing feeling of fatigue, about that fateful night, about the illness, about her husband's reactions. The psychologist did not scold or pity. She helped Rachel make sense of what was happening on her own. At the end of the session, she gently noted, "You blame yourself a lot, that's understandable. But to cope, you need to accept the fact. Yes, you made a mistake. Now it's important how to live on. What exactly do you want?" "I want my family back," Rachel sobbed, "at any cost." "Okay," the doctor nodded. "It's possible, but be prepared for a long journey. You've inflicted a serious injury on your spouse, and that doesn't go away quickly. You'll have to earn his trust again if he'll give you a chance at all." "I understand. And if he doesn't?" she asked softly. "You should be prepared for that outcome too. Your husband has the right not to forgive." At these words, Rachel turned pale and lowered her eyes. The doctor continued, You will need to work on yourself in any case. Even if the marriage cannot be saved, you remain the mother of your children. For their sake, you are obliged to be in resource, as they say now, so do not neglect yourself. Rachel nodded, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. Can I visit you? She asked quietly. I feel better when I talk to you. Of course, the psychologist smiled. We can meet as much as necessary. After that visit, Rachel felt a little better for the first time. At least she had a plan, work on herself, and try to get Mark to see a therapist. Even if it took a lot of convincing, she was ready. Surprisingly, fate itself soon provided a chance. At the end of the second week of their separate lives, Mark wrote that he wanted to meet and discuss the future. Rachel, worried and happy at the same time, agreed. They agreed on an evening when the children would be at their grandmother's. This meeting, the first since that nightmarish night, took place on neutral territory in the conference room of a law firm where a friend of his father worked. His father insisted that the conversation take place in the calmest possible environment, without shouting in front of the children or in public. Mark unexpectedly easily agreed to this format. Rachel arrived early and paced nervously, waiting. It seemed like a century had passed before the door opened and Mark walked in. He looked slimmer and very serious. Rachel's heart began to pound in her throat. "Hello," she said quietly. "Hello," he said, closing the door. No smile, no warmth, a formal tone. Mark sat down at the table, trying not to look directly at his wife. Rachel sat down opposite him, fiddling with her handkerchief. "You wanted to talk," she began uncertainly. He nodded briefly, then took a piece of paper from the inside pocket of his jacket. "I went to see a lawyer," he began dryly. "They laid out the possible scenarios for me, regarding the divorce." Rachel felt a chill inside. That was it, straight to divorce. "Mark." She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to stop the trembling. "Please." He raised his palm, stopping. "Listen to me. This is one option, an official divorce through the court. But I don't want protracted scandals for the children. There is another way: mediation and agreement." Rachel felt dizzy. Not yet divorce, but already words that send shivers down your spine. Trial, agreement. "Mark, are you sure?" she whispered. "Maybe. We can try something before." "Am I sure I can't live with you anymore?" he asked sharply. "Yes, I am." The words cut her heart like a knife. Rachel stared at the table, trying not to burst into tears. But Mark continued a little softer. "Before we go to the final, I agree to one attempt. A family psychologist. It's your idea, you wanted it, fine. My train of thought is this: if suddenly a miracle happens and I change my mind, okay. If not, then at least we can peacefully separate with the help of a specialist." Rachel looked up in disbelief. "Are you coming?" He nodded. "I'll go. The condition is 6 months maximum. If in 6 months I don't feel that I can forgive, we'll file for divorce." 6 months. Rachel found these words reassuring. That was how long she would have to regain her husband's trust. She nodded readily. "Okay, thank you, Mark. I promise you won't regret it." "We'll see." He rubbed his eyes tiredly. "I'm trying for the children's sake." "Yes, of course. For the sake of the children," she echoed. Somewhere deep in her soul, a prick stabbed, and for her sake. But it was absurd to demand this. "Then it's decided," Mark summed up, putting the sheet of paper back. "I'll find a therapist, or you find one, it makes no difference to me. We can do it through yours, like you wanted." "I'll look into it," Rachel said quickly. "I've already been to a consultant. She might be able to recommend a colleague for the two of us." "Okay," Mark agreed, standing up. He obviously considered the conversation over. Rachel stood up too. "Thank you," she repeated quietly. Mark just nodded, avoiding meeting her gaze. "See you at the session then." He turned and walked out of the room. When the door closed, Rachel let out a breath and realized she had been holding it for most of the conversation. Her heart was pounding, but there was a tentative feeling in it: hope. They will go to a family psychologist. Even if Mark does not really believe in success, At least he gave it a chance. And that means, perhaps, not all is lost. The first appointment with the family psychologist was scheduled for Tuesday evening. Rachel arrived at the office early and waited nervously, fiddling with the strap of her bag. She was afraid, what if Mark changed his mind and didn't come? But 5 minutes before the appointed time, she saw his car pulling up to the center. Her heart sank. He was here after all. They silently went up to the second floor and entered a cozy office, more like a living room. Soft light, two armchairs next to each other, opposite a chair for the psychologist. The specialist's name was Dr. Stevens. He was a short, plump man of about 50 with a friendly smile. He asked the couple to sit down, and he himself sat opposite with a notepad. "So, Mark and Rachel, right? Nice to meet you. I've reviewed your profile, but I'd like to hear your situation in your own words." Dr. Stevens began in a calm tone. "Who would like to begin?" Mark stared at the floor, clearly not eager to speak first. Rachel cleared her throat. I guess I'll tell you. We've been married for 9 years, and we have 2 children. And we're going through a serious relationship crisis." She felt her mouth go dry. The doctor nodded. "Crisis due to what?" Rachel swallowed, glancing at her husband. Mark remained silent, his face still. "Because of my betrayal," she said quietly. Dr. Stevens nodded slightly, expressing neither surprise nor condemnation. "I understand. When did this happen?" "About 3 months ago," Rachel answered. "In October, at a conference." Mark suddenly raised his head. "And since then, everything has gone down the drain," he said bitterly. For the first time in weeks, she heard a living emotion, albeit bitterness, in his voice. The doctor turned to him. "Mark, you are very offended and angry right now, aren't you?" "Of course," he snorted. "I can't even find the words to describe how much." "That's understandable," the psychologist confirmed softly. "Your feelings are absolutely normal. And how do you feel, Rachel, knowing about his pain?" "I'm terribly ashamed. It hurts," she blurted out immediately, feeling tears welling up. "I blame myself every day." Mark just sighed heavily, looking to the side. Dr. Stevens asked a few more clarifying questions. How long they had been together? Were there any problems before the betrayal? How did they find out about the betrayal? Rachel told most of the story herself. How she confessed, how they were now living separately. Mark added briefly that there was no trust left, and he didn't see what to do about it. "What would you both like to get out of this therapy?" the doctor asked after a pause. "I want to see if we can stay together," they said almost simultaneously. Only Rachel said, "Can I earn forgiveness?" and Mark said, "Can I forgive?" The doctor noticed this difference and pointed out softly. The wife wants to earn forgiveness. The husband wants to understand whether he can forgive. This will be our goal, to understand whether it is possible to restore trust. Mark shrugged. "I promised that I would try for 6 months, so I am trying. But for now, it's difficult for me." "Tell us what is most difficult for you," the psychologist asked. Mark clasped his hands. "I think about this incident all the time. It comes up before my eyes. Whenever I look at her." He stopped, shaking his head. "What feelings do you experience when you think about these thoughts?" "Pain, anger, disgust," Mark said roughly. Rachel squeezed her eyes shut, and tears started to flow. It was unbearable to hear her husband say disgust, but she understood him. Dr. Stevens handed her some napkins. "Rachel, do you feel his emotions now?" "Yes," she sobbed, "and I deserve all this." "Don't rush to take on all the labels," the psychologist shook his head. "We're not in court. Our task is not to look for the guilty party, but to understand what to do next." He glanced at both of them. "Mark, you are talking about disgust. Is it towards your wife or towards her actions?" Mark hesitated. "Good question. Honestly, I don't know myself. Probably to what she did. But when I look at her, I imagine." He stopped. "In short, to both." The doctor nodded slightly. "It's natural. Your reaction is very typical of the trauma of betrayal." "Injuries," Mark chuckled. "Exactly. They discussed Mark's feelings for some time. The doctor tried to get him to open up, and gradually Mark, albeit with difficulty, spoke. He said that he no longer trusted Rachel at all. "I used to be 100% sure of her, but now I'm not even 1% sure." He told how hard it was for him to pretend in front of the children that everything was fine, and how every conversation with his wife was painful. Rachel cried quietly as she listened to these confessions, but tried not to interrupt. It was the truth, his truth, and she had to accept it. Then Dr. Stevens carefully turned the conversation to Rachel. He asked what had driven her to cheat. Mark visibly tensed, waiting for this moment, as if he were preparing to hear something unpleasant. Rachel, wiping away her tears, tried to explain. "I'm not looking for excuses. But looking back, there were probably several factors at work. I was very tired, emotionally burned out. My husband and I hardly spent any time together then, everything the kids, work. In Chicago, I suddenly felt like I was in my youth. No worries, no responsibilities. I relaxed, drank too much, and I met a man who showed interest in me. I lost my head." She lowered her eyes. "I regretted it 1,000 times later. It was a mistake, stupidity." Mark listened attentively, his lips pressed together. The doctor asked, "Rachel, have you ever cheated on Mark before?" She shook her head sharply. "Never. I myself don't believe that this happened. I always loved him." Mark smiled wryly. "I loved him so much that on my very first business trip—" Mark let her finish. The psychologist stopped him gently. Rachel continued in a trembling voice. "I have nothing to say in my defense. I did the worst thing a wife can do to her husband. I can only regret and ask for forgiveness." "Have you already asked for forgiveness?" the doctor asked. "Yes, many times," she said quietly. "I don't want to hear apologies," Mark said. "What's the point?" The doctor raised his palms in a conciliatory manner. "Okay, that's clear. So, the situation, there was cheating once. Otherwise, for 9 years of marriage, you were faithful to each other, right?" "Yes," Mark confirmed quietly. "Before this incident, did you have any serious conflicts or disagreements?" They both shook their heads. In fact, their family had been quite prosperous before the betrayal. So, we can say that the betrayal was the catalyst for the crisis, but before it, there were accumulating problems. Fatigue, lack of attention to each other, Dr. Stevens concluded. This is a common story in couples with children. Of course, betrayal is an extreme, abnormal reaction to these difficulties. But now what has happened has happened. "Yeah, you can't turn me away," Mark muttered. "I want to ask you both about this." The psychologist leaned forward slightly. "Do you consider marriage, your family, a value worth trying to preserve?" Mark. The man gripped the armrest of the chair. "I used to think so. Now I don't know. Can a family be the same when there is no trust?" "Restoring trust is difficult, but possible," the doctor noted. "The question is whether you want to." Mark looked out the window. "I want the children to live with their mom and dad, but I don't want to live in lies and pain." "I understand. Rachel, and you?" "For me, family is the most important thing," she said firmly. "I'm ready to do anything to get my husband back, even if it takes many years." Mark shook his head as if he couldn't believe his ears. Dr. Stevens made a note on his notebook. "Okay, I think we have a lot of work ahead of us. I can't promise that we can save your marriage, but we will try to either restore your relationship or help you separate peacefully if all else fails." And so their therapy began. Every Tuesday, Mark and Rachel would visit Dr. Stevens and spend an hour or two trying to rebuild the dialogue. At first, it was not easy. Mark sat tensely for most of the sessions, barely looking at his wife. He spoke abruptly or simply answered the psychologist's questions. Rachel also felt constrained, although she tried to be open. Gradually, step by step, the doctor helped them talk through the accumulated grievances and fears. It turned out that Mark, in addition to rage, also had fear. The fear of letting his wife into his heart again and being betrayed. He confessed once during a session that he woke up every morning expecting a trick, and it was terribly exhausting. Rachel, bit by bit, regained his trust, or rather, tried to. She informed Mark about her every step, where she was going, who she was talking to, how long she would be late. She voluntarily showed him her phone so that he could see that she had no secrets. Mark sullenly rejected such attempts. "I don't need the role of a policeman." But the doctor noted that the willingness to be transparent was a good sign. They also discussed the intimate side. Mark admitted that the thought of intimacy with his wife was still repulsive to him. Rachel, blushing, said that she understood and that she would not press, she would wait as long as necessary. Inside, it hurt her to hear this, but she accepted it. They worked a lot on forgiveness. The doctor explained to Mark that forgiveness is a process, not a one-time decision. One day, he gave them an exercise. Write letters to each other. Mark had to pour out all his resentment on paper, and Rachel had to write her regrets and requests for forgiveness. At the next session, they read these letters out loud. Mark was choking with anger, reading, "You destroyed my faith in goodness. You trampled our love." Rachel cried, listening, but did not interrupt. When it was her turn, she read in a trembling voice, "There are no words to express how sorry I am. I am ready to atone for my mistakes all my life. You and the children are the most precious thing I have." Mark sat with his head down, not looking at her, but from his clenched fists, it was clear that it was not easy for him to hear this. After those letters, the tension between them eased a bit. At least they started talking to each other directly, not just through the therapist. Mark even agreed to have coffee together at a nearby coffee shop after the session on several occasions, discussing, mostly, the children's affairs. Those half hours over coffee were stiff, but still a step up from the icy silence of the previous months. About 4 months of therapy passed. Rachel still lived with her parents, but often visited the children, sometimes staying with them on weekends at Mark's house. On such nights, he himself went to sleep at his mother's, not ready to spend the night under the same roof with his wife. The doctor suggested this compromise so that the children would feel the presence of both parents. Mark agreed only partly. He did not want to live together, but at least gave Rachel the opportunity to be with the children in their house. Little by little, their lives were moving into a more stable direction. But the main question remained, would trust return? And that was becoming increasingly difficult to answer. One spring evening, when the period of testing stipulated by Mark was drawing to an end, at the next session, Dr. Stevens asked a direct question. "Mark, how do you assess your feelings now? Are you ready to try to start all over again with Rachel? Or is the idea of divorce closer to you?" Mark was silent for a long time. All that could be heard in the room was the ticking of the clock. Finally, he looked up first at the psychologist, then at his wife. His gaze was sad, even guilty. "Honestly, I tried really," he said quietly, "but I never felt like I could do it like before. It was like there was a wall between us all the time." A pain shot through Rachel's chest. She knew she was risking hearing that, but she still hoped for something else. She opened her mouth, but the words stuck. Dr. Stevens nodded attentively. "So, you are leaning towards separation." "I guess so," Mark said, barely audibly. "I don't want to live in suspicion any longer. Without trust, there is no marriage, and I couldn't forgive." Rachel squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her cheeks. She sobbed softly. I understand." The psychologist looked at her sympathetically, then asked, "Are you both sure that this is the final decision?" Mark nodded silently. Rachel covered her face with her hands, then, with an effort, she nodded too. If he couldn't do it, she wouldn't torture him any longer. The doctor sighed. "It's a pity that it happened this way, but at least you tried. Now it's important to complete the process in a civilized manner, so as to traumatize the children and yourself as little as possible." He started explaining to them about mediation, a negotiated divorce, but Rachel could barely hear it. It was over. Their marriage was over. The psychologist's last words brought her back to reality. "And you know, despite everything, you've done a great job. Now, Mark, at least you can communicate with Rachel without mutual accusations, and that's already good. You'll have to continue raising children together, and their well-being depends on how much you maintain respect for each other. Mark nodded sadly. We will try. Of course, Rachel whispered. She knew that for the sake of their son and daughter, they owed it to them to remain partners in parenting, even if they were no longer spouses. That was how their therapy ended, not in a happy reconciliation, as Rachel had dreamed, but not in bitter hatred either. Somewhere deep inside, she was grateful. Although Mark had decided to leave, he remained a good man and a caring father, and the rest was her punishment, which she would continue to bear. On the first weekend after the divorce was decided, Mark and Rachel gathered the courage to tell their children. On Dr. Stevens's advice, they decided to do it together, calmly and honestly, without unnecessary details. It was a cloudy day. Around midday, Rachel arrived at their house, the same one they had lived in for almost 10 years, but which no longer felt like home. Mark met her at the door with a frown on his face, but nodded in greeting. The children were in the living room. Sarah was watching a cartoon. Luke was pushing a car across the floor. "Mom!" Luke was delighted to see Rachel and ran to her. She picked her son up and kissed him. "Hello, my sweet." Sarah came over too, trying to guess from her parents' faces what was going on. Mark gestured for everyone to sit on the sofa. "Guys, your mom and I need to tell you something." Rachel's heart was pounding and her palms were sweating. She sat Luke down next to her and put her arm around Sarah's shoulders. The girl looked warily at her father and then at her mother. "What's happened?" Mark cleared his throat. "Remember, we said that my mother and I had problems and we lived separately." The children nodded. Luke pressed himself against his mother, clearly feeling the tension. "We tried very hard to fix everything," Mark continued quietly, "but we couldn't, and we decided that it was better for us to live separately, forever." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean? Separately, what does that mean?" Rachel patted her daughter on the back. "Honey, Daddy and I won't be husband and wife anymore. It's called divorce." She barely managed to keep her voice from shaking as she said the word out loud. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Mark nervously clenching his hands. Sarah immediately burst into tears. "No, no, please, I don't want a divorce." Rachel pulled her daughter towards her and hugged her. "Quiet, quiet, darling, listen." But the girl struggled, looking at her father. "But you promised that you wouldn't get divorced. You promised." "I'm sorry, Sarah," Mark said hoarsely, hanging his head. "We really tried." "Why?" she cried through tears. "I don't want to live separately." Rachel stroked her hair, crying herself. "Honey, I know, it's very sad, but it happens." "You don't love each other anymore?" Sarah blurted out suddenly, wiping her wet cheeks with her fist. Rachel was at a loss for words. Mark paused for a moment and then said, "We love each other differently now, but we love you and your brother as much as ever. That won't change." Luke had been sitting quietly all this time, hiding behind his toy. Now he asked plaintively, "We won't all live together." "No, baby," Rachel whispered, feeling her heart break. "But you'll see Mom and Dad, too, just separately." Luke thought about it, apparently not fully understanding, but seeing his sister crying, he also began to shed tears. "Where will I live?" Mark squatted down in front of his son. "You will stay to live in this house with me, and you will visit your mother often, as much as you want." He glanced questioningly at Rachel, and she quickly added, "Of course, you can come to me, spend the night with me. We will still decide exactly what is best." Sarah asked, sobbing, "Mom, are you going back to Grandma's?" "I'll probably find myself an apartment nearby," Rachel explained softly, "so that it'll be convenient for you to come over." The girl shook her head, not accepting what she had heard. She suddenly stood up and ran out of the room, slamming the door onto the street. Rachel immediately jumped up. "Sarah," Mark stopped her with a gesture. "Give her a minute." He himself looked as if he was holding on with all his might. Luke climbed back into his mother's lap and cried quietly into her neck. Rachel rocked him and whispered, "SHH, darling, everything is fine. Dad and I love you very much." She met Mark's eyes, tears in them, though he tried to hold them back. This look of understanding and shared pain was the first real connection they had had in a long time. Rachel whispered silently, "I'm sorry." Mark closed his eyes and turned away, wiping the moisture from his eyelashes with his palm. A few minutes later, they found Sarah in the yard, sitting on the porch. Mark sat down next to his daughter, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Forgive us, darling. We are very sorry that this happened." Sarah sobbed, clinging to him. "I want things to be like before." "We would like that too," he said quietly. "But we'll try to make sure you and Luke are okay anyway. I promise." Rachel carefully sat down on the other side and stroked the girl's back. "Sarah, you can always tell us what you feel. And if you are sad or scared, we will help." "Are you sure you won't change your mind?" she asked plaintively, looking at both of them. Mark shook his head. "I'm afraid not, honey." Sarah began to cry again, and Mark hugged her tightly. Rachel hugged them both, and the three of them sat on the porch, crying about their falling-apart family. There was much to decide in the next few days. Before the official papers were filed, Mark and Rachel had verbally discussed the initial arrangements. Rachel decided that the right thing to do was to give Mark and the children the house. Firstly, it belonged to both of them, but Mark could compensate her for her share. Secondly, it would be more peaceful for the children, as they wouldn't have to move. Rachel herself would move into a rented apartment nearby as soon as the divorce was finalized. Mark initially objected. "Where will you go alone? You don't have much money, you'll have to huddle." But Rachel stood her ground. "I can handle it. It will be fair." Deep down, she felt like she didn't deserve to stay in a cozy family nest after everything. Let Mark and the boys have a home, and she'll start from scratch. They also decided that the children would not be separated from either parent for long periods of time. Mark envisioned them living with him, but Rachel would have broad access. She could pick them up on weekends, see them during the week. In effect, it was shared custody, though the schedule had yet to be formally approved. There was still the matter of formalities. Neither Mark nor Rachel wanted to go to court. After talking to a lawyer, they chose the path of mediation, sitting at the negotiating table, peacefully dividing the property, drawing up a plan for raising the children, and then filing for divorce by mutual consent. One day, when the children were at school, they met with a mediator, an experienced lawyer specializing in family agreements. He asked about their situation, income, property, and then began to draw up a list of questions for discussion. Rachel kept her cool, deciding to accept whatever Mark offered as a small price to pay for her guilt. Mark, to her surprise, showed no greed or anger in these matters. He immediately stated, "The house remains with the children. That is, I will live there with the children, but when they grow up, perhaps we will sell it and divide it." Rachel just nodded. "Fine. Take the second car for yourself," he continued. "We have 2 cars, one for each of us." "Okay," she agreed again. It quickly became clear that there were no major disagreements. They didn't have much in common. Some was invested in the house, some in pension funds. They decided to simply split the bank accounts in half. Mark earned a little more than Rachel, but she firmly said that she did not claim alimony for herself, only for the provision of children. "There are no questions about that," Mark nodded. "We'll see how much is needed for their expenses depending on the situation." The mediator promised to calculate an approximate amount of child support using a standard formula, but hinted that if they agreed among themselves, the court would usually approve. The most important thing was to outline how the children would live. Both Mark and Rachel took this seriously. They decided to formalize joint custody without determining the primary guardian, that is, equal rights. However, in fact, Mark would remain the main place of residence in the house, and Rachel would take the children 3 nights a week, including weekends. They painstakingly drew on a sheet of calendar. Monday and Tuesday the children would be with Dad, Wednesday and Thursday with Mom, Friday, Saturday, Sunday alternated by week. This was called the 2-2-3 scheme. In addition, they agreed on holidays: Christmas this year with Mark, next year with Rachel, Thanksgiving the other way around. the children's birthdays celebrated together, if possible. The discussion was surprisingly calm. At times, the mediator even looked bored the couple found a compromise so quickly. At one point, he even remarked, "It's a pity that you communicate so civilly only at the divorce stage." Mark smiled sadly. "We are trying for the sake of the children." Rachel added quietly, "Yes, for their sake. They are not to blame." By the end of the meeting, the draft agreement was ready. All that was left was to refine it, print it, and sign it. They decided to do the final signing in a few days so that everyone would have time to think it over again or show it to their personal lawyer. Mark and Rachel walked out of the mediator's office into the parking lot. A cool April wind blew. Rachel pulled her coat tighter around her. She felt empty, but also oddly relieved that they had managed to reach an agreement without a fight. Mark suddenly broke the silence. "Thank you." She looked at him in surprise. "For what?" "For understanding, I guess," he shrugged. "For not starting a war." Rachel felt a pang of sadness. "I have no right to wars, and what will they give?" Mark nodded, looking tired but calm. "I hope we're doing this right," he said quietly. "For the children." "I think so," Rachel replied. "At least this way I can make it up to them." Mark said nothing in response to these words. They stood silently for a few seconds, not looking at each other. Then he sighed. "Well, I'm going there," he nodded towards his car. "And I'm going there," she responded, realizing the absurdity of the situation. Once they rode together, holding hands. Now they went their separate ways. "Mark," she called out as he opened the door. "Yes," Rachel chose her words. "You know, despite everything, I'm still grateful to you for all these years. For our children, you're a wonderful father." Her throat tightened, but she managed to smile through her tears. "I'm sorry for everything." Mark lowered his eyes, nodded, accepting her words. He looked at her again long, carefully, as if remembering. "Take care, Rachel." She understood. This is farewell. Not in words, but at the level of deep understanding. "And you, take care," she whispered. Mark got into the car and started the engine. She stepped back, watching as his car pulled out of the parking lot and disappeared around the corner. She could have cried, but perhaps all the tears had been cried. Rachel just raised her head to the gray sky and sighed. Everything was coming to an end, but they had made this end honest and dignified. It was a hot, tense June. In a small Cleveland County courtroom, Mark and Rachel sat next to each other at a table before a judge. Technically, it was a voluntary divorce hearing. In reality, it was just 5 minutes of standard questions. "Did you both voluntarily sign this divorce agreement?" The judge said. "Yes, Your Honor." They nodded simultaneously. "Do you confirm that your marriage has irreversibly broken down?" Rachel's heart sank at the cold language, but she answered firmly. "Yes." Mark added hoarsely. "Yes, I confirm." The judge glanced at the papers, then looked sadly at both of them. "West spouses, the court approves the agreement presented and orders the marriage to be dissolved. I wish you good luck and peace in the future." A blow from a small hammer, and that was it. After 9 years, their union officially ceased to exist. They walked out of the room, trying not to make eye contact. The mediator was waiting at the door, handing each of them a certified copy of the agreement and congratulating them on the successful completion of the process. It sounded almost mocking. Mark thanked her, and Rachel nodded quietly. They walked down the courthouse steps to the street and paused on the steps. It was the middle of a weekday. The children were at school. Rachel held the divorce decree in her hand, a thin sheet of paper that shattered the last of her hopes. "Well, that's it," Mark said quietly, breaking the awkward pause. "Yes," she replied, looking at the document. He tucked his copy into the inside pocket of his jacket. "I need to get back to work." "Of course," Rachel swallowed. "Thank you for coming. I mean, for making everything go smoothly." Mark smiled faintly. "Thank you. Take care of yourself." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. He turned and walked toward the parking lot. Rachel stood there for a second, then headed toward the car as well. She took the day off work that day. Back at her parents', where she was still living, Rachel locked herself in her room and finally let the tears flow. They were strange tears, both bitter and cleansing. Her marriage was dead, but her life went on. A new chapter lay ahead, unknown and terrifying, but her own responsibility. A month after the divorce, Rachel moved into a rented two-bedroom apartment not far from her old home. The place was modest, a kitchen living room, one bedroom, and a small office, which she had arranged as a room for the children. At first, there were only bunk beds and a toy closet, but the children enthusiastically helped decorate the walls with their drawings and stickers. Rachel felt guilty for tearing them away from their familiar home, even for those few days a week, but Sarah and Luke seemed to regard the new place as an adventure. They called it Mommy's house. At first, living together on a new schedule was not easy. Rachel was still working at the same clinic, Mark at his own company, and they had to strictly coordinate their schedules. They started a joint electronic calendar where they entered all the clubs, school events, doctor's appointments. This was new. Before, Rachel mostly took care of organizational details, but now both were fully involved. This even had its positive side. Mark began to spend more time with the children, learned to braid Sarah's hair in the mornings, and cook simple dinners for Luke. Rachel saw how he tried to be an even more attentive father and respected him for it. They were no longer spouses, but gradually became partners in parenting. In the few months since the divorce, they had settled into an even tone of communication, dry, but polite, mostly businesslike. They texted each other a lot. "I'll pick up Sarah for practice after school. Luke's feeling sick. Pick up some medicine from the pharmacy. Sarah has a parent-teacher meeting on Tuesday. Can you make it?" Each of these messages would have previously been painful, reminding them of their lost closeness, but now they were perceived as work-related moments. The children gradually got used to the new reality. At first, Sarah was sulking, sometimes crying at night when she slept over at her mother's, asking why she couldn't go back to the way things were. Rachel consoled her as best she could and signed her up for a child psychologist so that she could work through her worries. Luke, at 4, also showed anxiety at first. He carried a photo of his mother and father together everywhere with him. But after a while, he, too, stopped recalling the old days out loud, having fully adapted to the two houses schedule. Over time, Rachel realized that returning to single life was not only a grief, but also a chance to rediscover herself. She signed up for evening yoga classes on Tuesdays, the days when Mark had the kids. She tried meeting up with old friends who had been neglected by the years of family chaos. On weekends, when she was alone, she went on errands or just strolled along the embankment with a coffee. The emptiness inside was still there, but it was no longer as all-consuming as before. Mark, she noticed, was also slowly recovering from his long depression. He began taking the children on bike rides, sometimes with his friend Sean and his family. Rachel was glad he wasn't withdrawn, although their personal interactions were limited to children's issues. About 8 months had passed since the divorce. One evening, when the children were with her, Rachel, having put them to bed, was sitting on the couch with her laptop. She received a notification from Facebook. A certain Michael Randall had been added as a friend. She took a closer look. The photo showed a young man with a kind smile. It took her a while, but she remembered. This was the new doctor from their clinic, with whom she had been on duty on Saturday a couple of weeks ago. He had recently been hired and seemed to be interested in her. He invited her for coffee, made sweet jokes. Rachel did not pay attention then, but then he decided to find her online. Her heart began to beat faster. She was avoiding new acquaintances for now. She wasn't sure she was ready to trust someone again. But Michael seemed pleasant and unobtrusive. Rachel accepted the request. Literally, a couple of minutes later, a message arrived in the messenger. "Hello, glad to find you here. How are you?" She smiled at the screen and, after thinking for a moment, replied, "Hi, Michael. Thanks, I'm fine. How are you?" That's how their communication began. At first, they corresponded about common colleagues and interests. Then he suggested having dinner together sometime. Rachel was hesitant, but her mother, having learned that she was being invited on a date, insisted, "Go, don't be afraid. You deserve to be happy." And so, on a warm spring evening, Rachel sat in a small Italian restaurant across from Michael, listening to the story of how he hitchhiked after college. She suddenly found herself laughing at his joke openly, sincerely laughing. How long had it been since she had done that? Michael turned out to be understanding and sensitive. Before asking her out on a date, he tactfully asked her colleagues about her status and knew that she was recently divorced. But throughout the entire evening, he never once asked about the reasons or about her ex, talking about light, pleasant topics. Rachel was grateful for that. At the end of the evening, as they said goodbye, he unobtrusively kissed her on the cheek and said, "I hope we see each other again." She suddenly blushed, feeling a long-forgotten excitement. That night, Rachel lay awake for a long time, looking through her correspondence with Michael. She felt good, but also anxious. It seemed wrong that she could be cheerful with another man, as if she were betraying the memory of the past. But then, remembering the psychologist's advice not to dwell on feelings of guilt, she decided to give herself a chance. Michael became her first serious boyfriend after the divorce. They began to meet once a week for lunch on weekdays or for a walk on free evenings. Several months passed, and their relationship became closer. One summer, Rachel decided to introduce him to the children in a relaxed atmosphere at a picnic. Michael brought the children a bunch of sweets, played ball with Luke, and listened to Sarah chatter about school. After the picnic, Sarah seriously told her mother, "Michael is good. You like him, right?" Rachel blushed and nodded. Her daughter only sighed. "Well, if you are happy, so be it." These words put a lump in Rachel's throat. She hugged her daughter tightly. Mark found out about her new boyfriend. A couple of weeks later, Rachel herself carefully mentioned that she introduced the children to the person she was dating. Mark only raised his eyebrows at the time, but didn't comment, turning the conversation to the summer schedule. He took the news outwardly calmly, although Rachel noticed a shadow of sadness in his eyes. She understood that it was probably not easy for him, but he kept up appearances. However, by that time, Mark himself had also seen changes in his personal life. Back in the spring, when he took Sarah to an art club, he met the mother of another girl. Her name was Renata. She was a friend of his sister. They crossed paths several times on the playground and started talking. Renata, divorced for about a year, understood his situation like no one else. Gradually, Mark began to correspond with her, then drank coffee. And in the summer, around the same time that Rachel became close to Michael, Mark began openly dating Renata. Rachel noticed changes. When she brought the children home, sometimes she would see strange women's things in the house, an umbrella by the door, or a cup with an unfamiliar picture in the kitchen. And the children would let it slip that Daddy's friend had been walking with them in the park. At first, Rachel's heart would ache painfully. Jealousy was stirring, although she had no right to. But during the next show with the children, she herself asked, "Mark, you're dating someone now, right?" He hesitated slightly, then nodded. "Yes, with Renata Wolf. You must remember her. She is Sean's wife's cousin." "Oh, I see," Rachel tried to smile. "Good. She seems very nice." "Yes," Mark also managed something like a smile. "Thank you." They didn't discuss it any further, but Rachel was quietly glad. Mark wouldn't be alone. He deserved to be happy. Autumn brought new rhythms. A year and a half had passed since the divorce. Life had improved. The children were growing up healthy and happy. Sarah's grades at school had returned to their previous level, and Luke was already getting ready to go to preschool. Rachel and Mark had time to get used to their new relationship. They exchanged children without conflict and even began to sometimes attend school events together, sitting peacefully next to each other. Autumn brought new rhythms. A year and a half had passed since the divorce. Life had improved. The children were growing up healthy and happy. Sarah's grades at school had returned to their previous level, and Luke was already getting ready to go to preschool. Rachel and Mark had time to get used to their new relationship. They exchanged children without conflict and even began to sometimes attend school events together, sitting peacefully next to each other. At one such event, A school harvest festival. Sarah, dressed as a corn cob, performed on stage, reciting a poem. Her closest people were sitting in the audience. Mark on one side of the aisle, Renata next to him, and Rachel and Michael across the aisle. The children later joked that they had 4 parents to support them. Indeed, the atmosphere was almost family-like, albeit unusual. After the concert, all 4 of them left the hall with their children. Sarah dragged her mother's new bow to show them the school decorations. Luke ran ahead, dragging Renata by the hand. Mark and Rachel slowed down a little, suddenly being left behind. "The kids seem okay, they're happy," Mark noted, watching them go. "Yes," Rachel smiled, "they're happy we don't fight." Mark stopped, forcing her to stop too. He looked at his ex-wife calmly, without tension in a way he probably hadn't looked at her since the very beginning of this whole story. "You know," he said quietly, "I'm glad we're making it work. And even though I haven't been able to forgive you completely as a husband, I appreciate that you're a good mother and kept your word to change." Rachel felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you, Mark. You're a wonderful father, too. And I appreciate that despite everything, you didn't alienate me from the children." He smiled slightly. "I know how much you need them." They were silent for a moment, watching Luke laugh at something with Renata, and Sarah, her eyes shining, telling something to Michael. "I think they'll be fine," Rachel said with relief. "Yes," Mark agreed. "We managed to do what was best for them." He extended his hand, hesitantly but warmly, touching her shoulder. "Let's continue like this, as partners." Rachel nodded, holding back tears of joy. "Let's." They caught up with their new partners and children. Life went on, not at all as they had originally dreamed, but still with hope for the better. Rachel walked next to Mark, slightly behind Luke, who was being carried in Renata's arms, and Sarah, who was chatting happily with Michael. And looking at this unusual group, she realized their family had taken on a new form. Perhaps not a traditional one, but still a family where there was room for respect, care, and a future. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.